Good evening, everyone. Tá fáilte of Clare. Welcome to our April 2025 Kilrush and District Historical Society lecture. Please remember, if you have a mobile phone, to make sure it's on silent. If we need to leave in a hurry, there are two emergency exits, the one at the back and one over here on my left at the front of the stage. Welcome also to all those watching us live on YouTube. And tonight we're delighted to have Michael Talty. Many of you have met Michael, a native of Birmingham, but his parents are from Clare and he's been back in Clare from a young age, so he doesn't have a Birmingham accent. Michael took over from what we thought was the irreplaceable Peter Byrne, but we discovered Peter Byrne is very replaceable because Michael is just as good, if not better, than Peter Byrne as the local studies librarian and also in charge of the archives in Clare County Library, and has overseen the move into the wonderful new building beside Glore, which if you haven't visited yet, I highly recommend that you visit it. And tonight, Michael is going to talk to us about preservation and conservation for libraries and archives and your collection. And he will take questions at the end, and we will have two roving mics. This one is for the YouTube audience. This one is for the audience in the room. So I will want a volunteer who will take the mics around at the end during the questions and answer session. So please give Michael a big welcome.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through, as it says in the description, I'm going to talk about conservation, preservation for documents, for books, for collections in general, also for audio materials, for photographs, and for audio-visual collections as well. These are held by institutions, and these are held by very big institutions, and they're held by small institutions, and they're also held by people in private collections. And kind of an overarching thing I'm going to talk about in relationship to all this talk about conservation. Private collections, I mean business collections, but I would also mean collections held by families. I would also mean collections held by individuals and people that take care of their own materials. But there are tips and there are things that you can kind of basically maybe kind of pass over from the local archive, from the National Archive. In other words, we can all kind of interact with each other, we can work with each other to help each other. A part of it that I want to talk about later on is the knowledge and extra information to kind of give out on bibliography, the study of books, bound materials, that including all reports, diaries, and so on, as objects in and of themselves, and in terms of how we can kind of care for them. Also, how these objects are made, because how books are made tells us a huge amount about not just kind of the local publishers and printers and other people, but it tells you an awful lot about an area, about the economy of an area, about the intellectual life of an area at a given time. And I'll talk about that later on. National, local, and private collections, as I say here, they all feed into each other in terms of serving the research that we're all interested in. And we here are interested in the history of Kilrush, but we're interested in the Kilrushan district. And in terms of going further, we're interested in West Clare, and we're interested in Clare, and we're interested in Munster, and we're interested in Ireland. All of these things feed into each other. Local history is national history and indeed international history. To look at the collection, for instance, of the Glynn family, you would talk about a very local and very Kilrush-specific business and enterprise, but which in the development and the ideas that they create in terms of the way they develop their business is of national importance. They interact with banks and they interact with other people in a way that has a very, very wide-ranging level of contacts. And in terms of them being the owners of a shipping company, indeed, that collection has an international significance. All of this is just to say that this kind of talk about interaction and about relationships, it's not us and them, it's not up and down, it's about everybody trying to help everybody out in terms of the kind of research that they're trying to do. I'm first going to talk about preservation. Now, you've got preservation and you've got conservation. And conservation would essentially be, okay, I'm going to take care of an item, this book, and I'm going to kind of make sure that it's well repaired, and maybe I'm going to improve in it. I'm going to try and fix the broken pages and so on. Preservation is about keeping what you have to the best kind of level that you have it in. And it really involves, I suppose, the environment. And as I say here, the physical storage environment. So, you've got to kind of look at your collection that you would have either this. So in a place like this, really, you would be, this building, you would be not so much looking at temperature and relative humidity, I mentioned there. Temperature and relative humidity, things like that, they'd be important in the collection that you'd have in your household. So basically your house, the temperature goes up and down a hell of a lot more because you're living in the house. The atmospheric conditions and things like that change an awful lot because of that, but they don't change in a building like this. What you're worried about in a building like this also wouldn't be lighting, things like that, because it's relatively dark, and you would have stable conditions. It's what they call ambient conditions. It doesn't change too much. People think that when they're talking about the storage of old and very, very delicate items, that, oh my gosh, it can't be too hot or it can't be too cold. Really what you're looking at is that it's regular. It can be pretty hot or pretty cold, as long as it doesn't change a hell of a lot, then really that's kind of what's important. But the problem that you would have in a building like this, for instance, would be in terms of the atmosphere and whether, for instance, there's too much moisture in it. And it's a hell of a problem in a large building, that you're going to have issues with humidity. You're going to have issues with water damage. You may even have, with the building itself, kind of suffering. You would also have maybe, would you believe, atmospheric issues in terms of sulfur dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, dust, all of these things, all these issues with, you need filters in a building like this. So in terms of your house, you don't really need things like filters and things like that. Your house itself, you keep it relatively clean. You keep it well kind of ventilated. The temperature and all is pretty good in it. But where you have an issue in a building like this, it's something like mold, pest control, and then the kind of the temperature and so on. So you're looking for kind of ways to kind of improve in a very general way your general storage. In terms of your household collections, you're not going to be too worried about certain things. You're going to be worried about other things, such, for instance, temperature and relative humidity, not going to be a problem, but there will be other problems. Conservation, then, it's primarily the concern with the remedial treatment of already damaged items or affected items, or items that that would need, I guess, repair. And perhaps the most important thing you can do with all types of archival materials is fumigation. What you want to do is to remove those little critters. Now, in terms of repair, whether you're repairing reel-to-reel tape, whether you're repairing boxes, whether you're repairing basically any kind of substance, but most importantly, paper. You want to basically understand the basics of what you need to repair the paper. And it's pretty much the same as you would use if you were basically taping a page and you were taking care of it. It's the tape that you use. And I'll talk about that in a while. There are certain kind of things that you can buy and you can take care of in your kind of local collection that you have at home or that you have in your local society, and you can maintain items to a very high standard indeed. So I've kind of gone through repair steps. The first to be, how damaged is the item, and would repairing the item compromise the value of the item? So you may have a very, very valuable book. It may be a one-of-a-kind book. Perhaps the best thing to do is not to touch it at all. And then really you're talking about preservation. We want to retain it in the best possible way to in the condition it's at the moment. But if you do want to try and repair something, then you assess what you need to do and how much damage there has been caused to it. And an important part of that is provenance. It's understanding where the book has, for instance, or the item has come from, what has happened with this particular item throughout its history, and what kind of changes have been wrought upon these kind of archival items. Again, in terms of kind of conservation, you can use digitization. You can digitize all of the pages in a book, and you don't need to change that book. You don't need to do anything with it. So basically, the book can remain as it is. It can be preserved to whatever kind of level, and you've conserved it through digitizing it. And what we do is we take an awful lot of local collections, the smaller collections, and we'll digitize the material, and we'll try and preserve it in boxes that are acid-proof and lignin-free and a casing, and therefore we can hand it back to the person, and they can retain their own collection, or the local society can retain their own collection, and kind of everybody's a kind of a winner, to be honest with you. In terms of cleaning, you can clean kind of pages. You can start to kind of do repair work and conservation work yourself. You'd be surprised how much you can do. For instance, with newspapers, you can brush off all of your dust. You can use cleaning agents and solvents as long as they're natural. I'd say get in contact with us because we have kind of information on, let's say, cleaning photographs, cleaning glass plates, preserving and conserving materials. We can give advice on all of this, but you can actually do cleaning and fixing yourself. In terms of kind of, there's a step here when you're going to get to, if you have a document, debinding, stripping, and then the retaining sequence. The specific tools required for this. You can actually take apart, let's say, an old folder or an old book. You may need to do so maybe to digitize part of it, or perhaps you may need it to use it for exhibition purposes. Again, we'll give advice to people for their own private collection of how to do this, maybe for a project, but also, how to put it back together again. There's another thing of de-acidification. This is really kind of out there stuff. You can use kind of pH pages and you can see how much acid there is in the paper. I'll just talk about paper later on, but essentially paper into the 19th century made in Ireland at least, and in most European countries, from linen rags. So most of the paper is linen. And from the early 19th century on, you're talking about paper made from wood pulp. And the process used to make the paper from wood pulp involves dipping it in acid and also kind of exposing it to all these chemicals, which in turn kind of have their effect upon the paper. So you see all these kind of things in more recent books, often look in worse condition than older books. And there are different ways in which to preserve either. And I'll go through some of that. Finally, correct handling, storage. What you need to do is to store your items. And I would say, and I repeat this, and you'll hear this several times throughout this talk, acid-free and lignin-free. Okay, so the process of producing the paper or producing binding and so on involves kind of using an awful lot of acid in the process, and the acid remains in the item and as a result can damage it over time. And what you need to do is to put it in a box that will basically either leach the acid from it, put it in a containing paper or in some kind of containment that can basically stop the acid from progressing. The other thing is lignin. Lignin is a sort of a coloration, also known as foxing. And foxing is caused by a microbial interaction with the paper. Now, this can happen to linen-backed paper, and it can happen to the ladle kind of paper. And you can deal with this as well. You can clean it, you can treat it. But most of all, if you put it in a lignin-free and an acid-proof box, it will preserve for hundreds and hundreds of years, even if it's a machine-produced material.
I'm going to interrupt you for 1 minute. Our YouTube audience have lost the network connection to this other computer. So hopefully it's just a matter of connecting it again. If I can cursor. There we go. It seems to be connected.
Yes.
So we have to go back to Firefox and try again. Okay, we're getting there. Those of you listening to me, 3 microphones here, so into the studio and present and share screen and select entire screen and allow and back to PowerPoint and Now our YouTube audience should be seeing us again, and
We're good to go? All right.
almost let me do the audio first. Yes, I think we're good to go.
Okay, my apologies to the internet if they lost us there for a minute. Anyway, yeah, so I was talking earlier on about kind of, providing all these boxes and getting all these materials to preserve items and to conserve items. And I might just go back here through that there, yeah. So anybody can get kind of material from archival supply companies in Ireland. There's the Archival Box Company in Dublin. They supply the National Archives. There's Danu Heritage and Darroch. They'd be the three main ones. They're quite costly. There's Conservation by Design and Preservation Equipment. They're British companies. They have a larger selection of materials and they're a bit cheaper, but they take a long time since Brexit to get material. Best advice would be, if you have an old book or if you have some old material, please call into us and we'll probably have a box for you. And we'll probably have some kind of help to store your materials and maybe, as well, to get it digitized and put up on a USB stick for you. But look, the option is here that you guys can basically retain your old collections either for your local groups or for yourselves. In terms of the boxes, as I mentioned, acid-proof, lignin-free, use brass staples. Get rid of anything that has iron or steel on it. It rusts, it will destroy everything. It has about 20 times more acid and everything in it that is nasty than you could believe. In terms of kind of pouches and folders and anything else, again, and I keep repeating this, acid-proof and lignin-free, extendable kind of pouches and things like that, stuff that you can adjust around your books, your newspapers, anything that you have. You can use plastic to store materials. You can use it to store photographs and other materials, but I would advise to use mylar and polyester because they're natural plastics. They're biodegradable. They don't react with the photos. They don't react with the glass plates. They're really excellent, and that they can store very, very narrow materials. And again, just call into me. And if you've got your old photos or anything and you want to preserve them, you think they're kind of falling away to pieces or whatever, please call in. We can find pouches to sort them out. I would recommend always using your magnifying glass as much as you can to minimize handling the items. In terms of kind of measurement of the atmosphere, you need your thermometer and hydrometer. And can I just go to the screen? Would that be okay? So basically, it's an item like this. So this only costs a couple of euros. It's a pretty straightforward item. It measures the humidity, which is basically how much liquid there is in the air, and also the temperature. And that's really what you want to kind of get for yourself. It only costs a couple of euros. And as with anything else, if you're local in Clare, you can come to us and you can get it through us. We can help you with that. Anybody should have one in their house. Even if you have your LP collection at home, this helps out. It's fantastic. You can kind of keep an eye on it. In terms of the whole water temperature hydrometer kind of thing, it's done in a percentage setup. So really what you'll be looking at is if I am kind of hydro wise, I'm between 45% and 55%, I'm good. And as long as it remains fairly regular. If I'm going below that, then it's getting very, very dry in the house or in wherever you're storing your materials. If it's going above that, and this is the big problem in Ireland, then there's a bit of damp. Again, to reiterate, it doesn't really matter if it's damp all the time in your attic, as long as it's damp all the time. In other words, it's that things are regular. That's what you've got to remember. And, don't get too hung up on all this kind of stuff. Paper cleaning pads, brushes, liquids, and beeswax. You can use all these materials, most of them are natural materials like beeswax, to clean your pages, to clean your materials, and they're easy to source. Call again to us. Document repair tape. You can use your Scotch tape, your basic 3M Scotch tape, to repair your newspapers. But other than that, most of the materials that you would use would basically be this type of Japanese tape, and it's basically an archival paper repair tape. It's brilliant. It's almost see-through. When you put it on a page, you'll hardly see it, and it's so strong, and it will retain all the edges around your page, and it'll sort it out, and it doesn't usually detract from the value of your item if you have your kind of whatever book. I would put a caveat on these things, that if you have a book that is inundated with acid, i.e. something that is incredibly brown pages, you know the way you see foxing on the page, just say the entire page is completely brown. That means it's inundated. Now you often see this with newspapers, because the paper that used for newspapers is the cheapest paper of all. So newspapers tend to suffer the most in terms of as paper, and the entire page is brittle and in danger of being destroyed. Maybe in that case, don't use any tape, and just you're talking about preservation. Now I'm going to just talk briefly about books and bibliography. So anybody who kind of retains kind of collections of antiquarian books really should have some kind of knowledge on how the book is made. So in other words, I talked earlier on about how paper would have been, well, the original paper, you would have had stone carvings, and then later on you end up with vellum. Papyrus and then vellum. And in Ireland, the earliest documents are made in calfskin vellum or goat skin. And it's only really from about the 12th century on that paper is imported into Ireland. And it's only really from the age of printing and from the age of mass printing in Ireland, which really is in the late 17th and early 18th century. So I'm really talking about books like this. If I could just, yeah. So this book here is Citizen of the World. It's Oliver Goldsmith, and I picked it out specifically because one, it's an Irish published book, published by Ewing Brothers of Dawson Street in Dublin, for the Irish writer Oliver Goldsmith, and it's a first edition, and it's from 1767. Now it's produced. You've heard of the Shakespeare folio, okay? So the folio is the first edition of Shakespeare. And folio is a type of book that's very, very large. So a folio sheet is basically one A1 sheet kind of doubled over. And basically it has 4 pages when you think about it. If you double it over, you've got page 1, page 2, page 3, and page 4. The next one that comes after your kind of folio, you have basically your quarto. Because if you folded it again, then the 4 pages become 8 pages. The folio is 2 pages, 2 leaves rather, and 4 pages. The quarto is 4 leaves and 8 pages. And then the octavo is 8 leaves and 16 pages. This is a duodecimo, which is basically 12, okay? So it's what they've done is they've got a sheet of paper and they've cut it down. And I'll show this in an illustration in a while. But if you look at an old book like this, okay, and I'll just take this out, okay, what you see is just at the bottom here, just at the bottom here, you can see the page number, but also you see a kind of letter, okay? And sorry, now just try and, how do I maneuver this so there's, okay, I'm gonna, over here, brilliant, yeah. So you got a page number and you've also got letters at the bottom. So the pages denote 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, but the letters denote what part it is in the original paper that was used to create the document. And it can tell you what type of kind of way the document was folded up. So in other words, this giant piece of paper was folded up and then cut to make all of these pages. And the pages will go in sequence, okay? But the letters underneath, you'll have an A and then 8, or in this case 12, because it's duodecimo. So you got an A and then 12 pages, and then it goes to B and then 12 pages. So even if the book is broken up, and you can kind of see an old book, and if you look at the page and you see the number and you see the letter, and you can kind of figure out, okay, what this kind of structure of book was, and also at what time it was made, and usually by whom it was made. There are other things you can look at as well. In terms of the paper itself, you see the frontispiece of the paper, and you can't really see this, but I can see it here. You see there, you see these lines, okay? Now, basically what they did with this, they got linen rags, they dipped them into a giant vat with some chemicals in it. It's on a big chain, okay? And the chain is all these lines of kind of steel lines, and they lift it up and down, and they lift it up and down, they lift it up and down, and eventually the mush becomes a page. And by the shape of the lines on it, you can tell a whole lot. You can tell the way in which the book was cut, but you can also tell probably the country from which the book kind of came. And then if you add to that basically bookmarks or paper marks, you can see the city or the place, and you can tell all this kind of stuff about it from the book as an object. And it's interesting to kind of know about the book as an object because it adds to its value and so on and so forth. These books, when they were bound, they weren't bound like 19th century books. What you kind of see is there's nothing kind of in between there. They're a solid kind of a mass. And actually this particular book has had conservation done in it where it had kind of fallen off and it's been repaired, but you'd almost wouldn't notice it. This was done by Pat O'Brien in the repair clinic, Trinity College in Dublin. And to kind of show you, here's a later version of the same book. So it's basically that volume 2, it's bound differently. It's basically, this is machine pressed paper, and this is paper made from wood pulp. And you can see the browning in it. Whereas the linen paper looks like it was produced yesterday. Can we go back into the, that's great. Okay, so what I'm kind of talking about is kind of that, materials are hand printed. The paper production can go from undyed linen rags and move on to wood pulp paper. All these molds and watermarks, you can tell the paper producer, you can tell the source country, and then the chain lines, the lines that are on the paper. You can work out things about the size of the paper and therefore by the people that produced it. So for instance, we know that there's books and quite a lot of books produced in County Clare. We know that the Knox family in particular, the people who produced the Clare Journal, produced a whole lot of books. We bought in one book last year that we believe it's a one of a kind. It's an only surviving book in the world, and it was produced in Ennis. We know that there were books and pamphlets produced and printed in Kilrush. One of the most interesting kind of subjects, and I think it's something that will be further developed in the future, is the history of circulating libraries. Shops had their own library from which people could basically, they could loan books. And it was a way for Catholics in particular, and poor people in general, to kind of get access to learning. It's also kind of a place where people will meet politically and so on. And it's also a place where things are being published. So for instance, Toohey's shop in Jail Street in Ennis, they are journalists with the Clare Journal, so they're involved with the Knox family, but they themselves are producing materials, they have their own little library, and they're kind of creating stuff. And this is Clare stuff for Clare people. And it's very, very interesting, and a subject that's been underdeveloped and something that I think people will work upon in the future. So that's all this kind of material on the books there. So so this is what a book is laid into. And if you see here, this is for a quarto, basically, or is it? Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So it's 4 kind of leaves and then 8 pages, and that's kind of how it would look. And then they'd have something on top of it, and that would whack on. And you kind of can figure out here when you look at this. This is kind of the divisions between, you can see that on the top of the page, you would have kind of 4 and 4, and then 4 and 4, which totals to 8 pages. It's one big, huge sheet divided, and then you can kind of see the dotted lines in between, which is where they'll cut it. And then in the middle, you've got kind of duodecimo, and then you've got other ones. So basically, different countries and different places produce different ways of making paper, of dividing up the paper, and of kind of adding all these annotations and things to it. And it's even on a local level. It's really quite distinct, and it's very interesting, I think. Okay, example of a bibliographical citation. You might see this in some of your kind of like highfalutin kind of catalogs, books in De Burkas or somewhere else. You see the 4 and then the 0 after it. That means it's a quarto. A2 means they've got a frontispiece of 2 pages, the blank piece of paper at the start, because there's a 2 over it, it's divided in 2. Then you've got a B and then a 2K4. And what does that mean? What it basically means is it goes from, so the letter A is represented by 2 pages, and then B and going through to all the rest. That would be represented by 4 leaves or 8 pages, and it goes all the way up to the letter K. And then the 4 means that 4 letters are left out. Okay, so basically what you end up with is this is probably a pamphlet. It's a broadside, most likely. It's done in a quarto kind of a format. In other words, that each of these little kind of 4-leaf things are all kind of bound together or stitched together. And you end up with 2 L's, which is the blank paper at the end. And immediately from looking at that, you're kind of going, okay, this is something probably, it's a political broadside. It's probably 19th century or something like that. Because of the kind of size of it, and sure enough, this is the kind of bibliographical citation used for a pamphlet related to the Ralahine commune. And so to kind of know this and the way that the item is created, it's an interesting kind of addition to the study of the books themselves as objects. Storing books, basically, yeah, to store a book, you always store the book, and I'll just, again, if you're just going to go, you store the book near the front. Just say this is the shelf here, okay? You store the book right at the front, near the front of the shelf. And you store them all basically one after the other. You do never, ever, ever take your book out like this. What you do is you push one book in at one side, you push the other book in at the other side, and then you take the other book out in the middle. You always do it like that. You do not take this out, because if you do it long enough, and we've seen it, you end up basically wrecking the binding of the book. Okay, so temperature stable, everything's good. Now, I just want to talk about manuscripts. So in Ireland, book production is relatively recent. It is something that really has only become ubiquitous since the 1850s. So, you know, following Catholic emancipation, following the fact that the majority of the population had enough money to buy books, and that there is enough of an economy for people to be selling and producing and so on, it's something that only really develops from about the 19th century. But for many, many, many hundreds of years, from the time of the end of the Great Gaelic Lords to the beginning of that kind of publishing age, you had local scholars, and there were a hell of a lot of them in Clare, recording all kinds of information and creating all kinds of art and writing it down on basically in their kind of manuscript form. Now, this is not manuscript form like the Book of Kells. This isn't done onto vellum kind of sheets. What they're doing is they're buying notebooks, or what are called chapbooks. And a chapbook is a kind of it's basically, if you could have a kind of a book, but with no typing in it, and blank, and maybe with some kind of lines drawn on it, but with no cover. And maybe you can put the cover on yourself, so it's relatively cheap to buy. This one here, this is a page which contains the last part of a transcription of Court and Vanihe. So Court and Vanihe, of course, written by Brian Merriman. A first transcription made by Brian Merriman following his performance of the poem in 1780. He considers 1780 to be the launch of his book. So this is like the publication of his book, but it's not a publication in the way we understand it. This is him performing. So if you want to look at the original edition of a Court and Vanihe, it would have to consist of 39 pages with 1026 lines within. And each page would have to correspond. If you see here in the top of one of the pages, you see 39 and 38, and you see all these lines. So if you can imagine, somebody is basically on page 1 and they have to perform their poem. And he had to perform his poem in front of a court of poetry, which was presided over by a guy called Thomas Meehan, or Tommaso Meehan, who was a maths teacher. All these people were maths teachers. They're all amazing people. They're absolute multi-hyphenates. They're fantastic. They're teaching kind of local gentry, they're writing, and they're producing all this stuff. And they have their own society, which is a court of poetry. And this court of poetry, you read out your poetry, and so he'll go on page 1, and then he turns a page. So it has to be structured in such a way, 39 pages, 1026 lines, including all the naughty bits. And then he finishes his, and they say, this is great. And the guys who are listening to it, they have a court of poetry, and they have a jury, and the 12 men in the jury all vote and say, merry men, this is brilliant, and it's immediately transcribed. And then it's transcribed again. And this is a transcription by the McConsidine brothers, but specifically probably the guy Micheál McConsidine. It's from 1818. The first recension or transcription, i.e. Merriman's, presumably, is held in Oxford. The second one is held in Dublin and the RIA. And we think this is one of the third branch, of which there probably have been several. And it's produced by these Considines. Again, particular Micheál Considine. It's incredibly unusual in that it's signed and he gives his address. And his address is the Boreen in Ennis, which was the original road to Galway, but is today the back of Marion Avenue and the back of Steele's Terrace and a tiny little lane. And they would have lived right there. And we know exactly where they lived. And we know exactly where they probably wrote this. And that's highly unusual because it was dangerous to be kind of writing this stuff. And this relates back to, again, that this is not printed material. Now, to go back to this story that I'm telling you here of kind of paper and preservation and so on, within this page, you can see it's linen paper, it's Irish produced paper, it's got all those kind of lines and it's got all this other kind of stuff. And you can tell all of this about the actual paper and the structure. So this is a very, very old Irish script, and it's a medieval kind of way of transcribing things. It even includes ogham at the end. And in the last lines of the poem, there's all this kind of addition and subtraction and all this other stuff. He's done a little bit up in the top corner to kind of illustrate how 1780 kind of shows it's the date of publication. And then finally, there's a little ogham bit. We don't have the key for the ogham, so we don't know about it. But so what I'm kind of showing you is the relationship in manuscripts and handwritten manuscripts to the book as an object. And this is a book, and this is a very important book. Now, the publication of Cuairt and Vanille, i.e. how it's printed, there are so many different versions of it. There are so many edited versions of it. There are so many bowdlerized versions of it. There are so many versions that are censored. The first version is in 1850. They take out about half of the material, I think something like 600 lines. First English translation done by Dennis Wolfe at 6 Mile Bridge. That's a handwritten translation. Only 936 of the 1026 lines. So you don't get proper original versions again until the 20th century. But all of these versions, and I have them here that we hold in the library. And by the way, we hold that original manuscript, the McConsidine one as well, in the library. Anybody come along and see it, it's great. And anytime you want, call into the office and I'll get it up for you. And we'll pour over it. It's brilliant. So all these kind of versions here, I show you to kind of illustrate the difference in size, production, publication, different countries. Very, very useful information kind of in the metadata, as I'd call it, on the books, and to tell you about the way the book's produced and how much of the book is there and how much of it is translated, the political background that was there at the time. You know, you look at Frank O'Connor's translation of Cuairt and Vanille, it's incendiary, and it loses him his job in the libraries and causes him no end of trouble. He goes to America and he recreates himself as a writer, you know, and it changes things. And you know, you have to kind of understand the context, I think, of art and of these publications and things, you know, through kind of what's in them and the book as an object. And in terms of your collections, it's a really interesting thing to kind of know about your collections. You know, it's not just the kind of content; it's the casing. It's really interesting. Now, this very, very small document here, which I'll just conservation of your collection. Yeah. So sort of a balance of forces, composition, nature, wood, cardboard, leather, parchment, and adhesives make things super. Yeah. So we've gone through all this. It's basically you know, kind of good health for your books. What I mentioned earlier on about shelving, leave them at the front, biological enemies, animals, insects, microorganisms, and then the conservation work. We've gone through this already. You can fumigate documents yourself. The only thing that you have to do is stick it in a freezer. Okay? You get your book, you get your object, you get pretty much your audio, reel-to-reel tape, whatever you have, put it in a freezer, put it in for about 48 hours. Larry Brennan found a couple of extra bound editions of materials relating to the Our Ladies. Very, very interesting information, kind of at the bottom of somebody's bed somewhere, and brought them in and was kind of worried because there was all this kind of stuff on them. And we said, look, we'll just put them in the freezer. And then immediately they're gone in the freezer. Look, whatever's on them at that point is dead at that stage. And it's then we can kind of get into the cleaning and sorting them out. So that's it. Just stick it in the freezer for a good bit of time. Book repair companies. Yeah, you can go to binderies. One of the best in this neck of the woods would be the Muckross bindery. But there's binderies all over, and there's very good book binders. There's a very good guy in Limerick, Harry Getlavog. He's binding 200-year-old copies of the Ennis Chronicle for us, and he's doing a great job. So, you know, he was in Elsevier in Shannon, and he's as good a binder as anybody. If you really want to get into the really, really old stuff, Muckras. But again, call back to us. We want to help out. And make sure that if you are getting any work done, check your watermarks on your paper. Check all these kind of other little telltale marks on it. You don't want things to be back to front or anything like that. Make a note of all this stuff in terms of the book or the report or the document as an item. Okay. Photographs. Yeah, you know, in preservation of photographs, you really have to be aware of the photographic processes, what way the image is created, and then the deterioration that will be linked to how that kind of thing was created. So, for instance, one of the most resilient, often the most resilient of a kind of a medium or a media is the earliest version. So, you know, kind of the earliest versions of writing are carved in stone, and they've lasted for thousands of years. Yeah, some of the earliest versions of photographs were on metal. And then after that came glass plates, and they're surprisingly resilient. I remember seeing a glass plate in the archive in RT of Countess Markovich, which had been smashed, and I don't know in many ways, and they literally stuck it together with glue, and they digitized it, and it came out absolutely perfect. I was amazed. If it had been a paper that had been torn to pieces, it would have been. It's remarkable. But it's glass, and it's highly, you know, kind of you got to be careful. Binder, yeah, the transparent layer could include albumin or collagen or gelatin. Okay, so the sticky bits on the photograph, you've got to kind of know what kind of transparent layer was used in the production of the photograph, and it's one of the first things we'd try and do if we were kind of looking at preserving it. So some photographs, some tape, in particular some film, itself could self-combust, and you'd have to keep it in very, very, very ambient conditions and basically try and, for instance, we had old film that related to the RT news archive, and it was so unstable that we had to set up a projector like this in a freezing room and play the film and then videotape it. That was the only way that we could the material, and then literally stick it in the fridge, and that was the end of that. Storage, as long as storage is chemically and temperature-wise and everything else, as long as it's stable, but particularly chemically stable for photographs. So plastic, polyester or mylar, excellent, because they're natural, they're biodegradable. The stuff doesn't stick to them, and it doesn't react. Avoid acidic paper envelopes. Again, it's the paper that makes the envelope is an old paper, or if it's a particular type of paper. So basically, make sure that it hasn't got acid in it. You can get what these buffered envelopes and things like that these kind of mylar in. They're excellent. They're really, really. Sorry, but the buffered mylar should be avoided. But there's ones with mylar in it. They're very good. But with the older plastic, very bad. But again, it says here to be okay for negatives or photos and frames or under glass. Yeah, the last thing is to do not engage in conservation work for photographs. Leave it to the experts, and that includes, that's something that a lot of archivists could have listened to. They didn't listen to that. Multimedia. So there's a kind of thing of what do we do with multimedia items? With audio archives, until recently, the only option was to give away to a national or an international archive and to have it go out of the country. Jim Carroll, who's here in the audience, has an amazing archive of traditional music, going back to the time of Willie Clancy, and before that. He was in a group with Ewan McCall, I believe, at one point, and recording music from a very, very early date. And he has a huge collection today. We've digitized a certain amount of that on our website. An awful lot of it has gone to the Irish Traditional Music Archive. But the thing is that it's going to go to Clare, and as much as can stay in Clare, it's going to stay in Clare, and also can be available to people here for research, and particularly for singers and for people who are interested in song, because they're often not kind of as well regarded as musicians. So it's great that we can kind of work with people like Jim, but we can also work with people like Quivitive and Clare Memories, in terms of folklore and recording, and trying to help people who have stuff in different media, different versions of media like reel-to-reel or quarter-inch tapes. We can digitize stuff, and we're able to work with RTE, we're able to work with the National Archive and with other people, basically to convert files. Jim has converted an awful lot of stuff to digital himself, but sometimes it isn't. So we have another collection from a guy called Rolly Brown, and it's all in reel-to-reel, and we're in the process of going through it. And what's really interesting is that in between the songs that have been recorded, there's a huge amount of information on people. I can't get over in one recording from Rolly Brown where there's a guy talking about weavers in Milltown, and he goes through the Bellard Road and he must mention 20 families of weavers. I'm absolutely amazed. My dad is from Milltown. I never knew this kind of thing was there, and it's just somebody casually talking about it in between playing his reels and his hornpipes. It's fantastic. Digital storage. We can now store stuff in the cloud. So we can basically, if we have to store huge collections of material, so let's say national kind of collections or council collections, they'll go on national sites because they're just huge. But local collections, so the OD papers, which Owen Shanahan has donated in, or local business papers, or an awful lot of folklore and music and other things, we'll store them on the RTE website, or on the Clare Library's website. Sorry, I went back into a previous job there. But we will store them there in that, and we will store them, and it's available not only in Clare and hopefully in somewhere like Kilrush, but it's also available through our website locally. And there's an interaction that we can all have with each other. It's the kind of thing that Paddy has been involved in terms of, you know, sharing information on the DNA research and so on, and everybody can kind of work together and they can use all the information to really advance research. Well, hopefully we can start to do this with all this multimedia. So yeah, that's kind of multimedia archives. Maps and drawings. Okay, so basically, foxing and kind of damage to maps and so on, that's the kind of worst thing that can happen to them. You'd be surprised how many people have maps. No, my own thing is that I think maps should always be hung. I don't think they should be laying down, but you know, you mightn't have the kind of space to kind of do that. If you can at all, hang a map, even if it's on a clothes peg, it's probably the best thing for it. Rolling maps up will cause pressure and embrittlement to the edge of the map, and they'll also dry the map out so that you'll have trouble with it later on. So if you can try and kind of basically leave it hanging, you know, great. For drawings, of course, you leave them lying down, but whatever you do, you don't leave the different sizes of drawings on top of each other, because you're going to have problems and all this kind of, you know, try and kind of store them together. And remember that we can help you out. We can supply paper that you can kind of put in between all of these items so that basically, you know, you can store them. Best boxes for maps are custom built, and you can make cradles for it. Anybody can kind of basically 2 bits of cardboard kind of put together in a kind of shape like that, and you know, you put your kind of maps upon them. That's as good as anything else for storing maps. Right, so there are books that you can look at. We have them all in the library. Provenance Research and Book History, great book. It's all that stuff like watermarks or presses on paper or people's personal bookmarks. It's a huge thing. My predecessor, Peter Byrne, did an awful lot of work on the bookmarks of people like the Vandeleers, Pilkingtons, all these other families. And you can tell an awful lot about the collection of a person by their book stamps and by all this other information. Bookstore Care and Repair is a really good pamphlet on it. It's a good kind of a introductory pamphlet. Caring for your collections, it's kind of a general kind of book that's related to antiques, but what it's great for is kind of how to kind of keep your kind of storage area clean and free from dust and all these other things. Very practical stuff on kind of retaining any kind of collections you have. Planning and construction books and paper conservation laboratories, really kind of complicated stuff, but basically it relates to, see what the lady is doing there on the table in the picture. Yeah, you can kind of basically have your own little table, your own little corner, and you can clean your own paper, you sort out your own books. Caring for Books and Documents, another great pamphlet. And then all that mad stuff I was talking about in terms of bibliography and Quarto and Octavo and all that stuff, if you really want to dive into that, Philip Gaskell's book is probably the best book on that. Now, accessioning provenance details are as important as listing. So if a collection is in a family's care and then it's transferred to an old business office, then it's donated to a third party, then it's held for several years, then the family have a check through it and they remove pieces, then the collection is acquired or donated or sent somewhere else. There's nothing wrong with any of this. This happens all the time. The only thing that's important is that all of these happenings or processes are recorded. So we know that. So when Paul O'Brien got the great Barrett collection donated, we knew that several members of the Barrett family had their own personal collection, that the collection was held in their business in Kilrush for a very long time. The business closed down. There was a donation to a third party. It was held for a certain amount of time. There's a certain amount of research done with it. Family members basically, acquired pieces and had control over pieces. This happens all the time. And then the collection then, for the most part, went to the Clare County Archives. But this is all documented. We kind of know where everything is. There's a couple of small kind of just tips. When you're removing staples and clips, try and replace everything with brass clips or brass staples, plastic clips. Yeah, so there's going to be a problem because digital records, there's a huge up, and we can help out. So listen, thanks for listening.
Thank you, Michael. We'll throw it open now to questions from the floor. Trying to figure out my screen layout here. Strange things are happening on screen. 2 microphones here. One is for the YouTube audience. One is for the audience in the room. So Paul will take them both around to anyone who wants to ask a question.
Anyone? Questions? I don't know how far the second one will go, but we'll see. Okay, we'll go a little bit.
You may have to move forward if there are any questions.
Is there any
Or
questions?
if anyone online wants to type a question in the YouTube chat, we'll put them to Michael here. Michael Hanley there has a question.
Michael, have you a question? Yes.
Yes, okay. Just a quickie, Michael. What kind of a book is 2 feet deep?
What kind of a book is 2 feet deep?
Yeah, when you were talking about having books on the shelf.
Oh, right. Okay, so yeah. So the folio document. So the larger the kind of document. So, okay, so what you would have had was a type of paper when paper was first produced called Imperial. Okay, so that's the time of the Gutenberg Bible and all this kind of stuff. And it basically is kind of an A1 size. So you've got an A4 page. So an A4 page is half the size of an A3 page. An A3 page is half the size of an A2 page. And then an A2 page is about half the size of an A1 page. And all of these are sizes that were introduced in Germany. Kind of within the Holy Roman Empire at a given time to kind of basically say, okay, we're going to make paper, it'll be of this size. But the original size was actually double the size of A1. It was called Imperial. And Imperial, when it was kind of folded over, produced these absolutely massive books that were, let's say, 2 foot by 2 foot, and they were known as folio kind of versions because it's literally, because the page is so large, they literally had to fold 1 page over and make it into 2 leaves or 4 pages, and then they would have to sew that, okay? So the thing is, the smaller you make the little cutting in the page, the more of these things that you can kind of sew together, and the cheaper the book would be by definition. So once you're kind of going from a folio to a quarto to an octavo to a duodecimo, you're kind of going down to a kind of a cheaper version of a book, okay? So the very, very large version. So the folio version of Shakespeare, that's a prestige version that would be produced for aristocrats. And it's, kind of the very first version often in the 17th century and the 16th century, and even going into the late 15th century incunabula. Incunabula is the name for books from about 1450 to 1500, and it's kind of in the cradle. It means it's the infancy of book production. But they would have been extremely large at the start. And then they would have made them
from the top to the bottom.
Yeah. But that's just the paper. It's 2 kind of by 2, then the binding is absolutely colossal. They're huge things altogether. That's a 2 by 2.
Thank you very much, Michael. Tell us about the digitization of documents. You know, what sort of technology have you got, and what's your capacity? You know, let's say if you get, you know, an archive, have you got the resources and the people and the machines to digitize a lot of documents?
We do. So we have had a digitization project in the Clare libraries since 2013. And we have now digitized 600,000 pages. There's 3 of us working on the machine. It's a pretty amazing machine. It kind of works on 2 levels, so that when the book kind of is kind of held, or the bound item is held, that it can kind of space itself out, and you can kind of basically scan kind of the 2 pages together, or it can be flat. It can do it to a very, very high resolution. It can produce the highest quality TIFFs for photographs or for exhibition purposes. For the most part, what we do is we scan items as JPEGs, and then we put them together as what's called PDFs. In other words, they're kind of formatted together into a book. To give you an illustration of how quickly we could do something, Jim donated a book of Jacobite minstrelsy songs. It's about 250 pages, and we completed that in an afternoon. So you could go through about 1,000 pages in 2 days. You should be at a fairly good rate. If you wanted to, and that's just to be going through a book. If it's something that you're going through, let's say personal papers of someone like Joseph Barrett or Frank Barrett, it might be relating to the 1917 by-election. They're extremely fragile pieces because these guys are literally on the move and whatever, and also that it's poor paper, because they're poor people and they don't have that kind of fantastic vellum or whatever. So we have to then literally treat it with kid gloves. So you would be talking about digitizing maybe 100 images in 2 days. But they're for exhibition purposes and for other purposes. What we would do in the instance of that is we will digitize a certain amount of materials and then make them searchable through a thing called optical character recognition. So it's a technology that literally makes the words searchable. But when you've got something that is highly fragile, we would probably transcribe. So we'll provide a transcription of it and then put that up, and we might have a picture and so on. But we're not going to kind of try and kind of get something super kind of de-duper version of it, so that we can start doing OCR and trying to join these together and whatever. Because when you're working with that kind of scale, you will have an awful lot of trouble with the quality of, in other words, you'll damage documents. Yeah.
Thank you. Is there anybody else? Okay.
We have a couple of questions here from our online audience.
Okay.
Just take that. This one, to make sure those of you listening online can hear me reading the questions back to Michael. Brian Comerford says, you mentioned merrymen as being dangerous in the 1800s. Could you expand on that?
Right. So there's 2 ways in which kind of the merrymen group and those kind of people are dangerous, is in that they are, I guess, intellectual Catholics writing Oscailga. They have their own kind of group where they have rules that are remarkably similar to Conor na Gaeilge 100 years later. You have to speak Irish when you enter the room. You have to have a certain level of Irish. You have to have a certain understanding of Irish history. By extension, you probably have to be some bit of a United Irishman, basically. And as a result, they're not seditious, but they are kind of people that are sort of on the edge in terms of their kind of culture. The other reason why it would be dangerous is because of the content of Cuairt Van Ihe, which is, I guess, a very, very individual poem about kind of issues that, you know, kind of are very modern, you know, about life and love and sex and so on. And at the time, they were almost immediately censored for a very long time.
And our secretary, Paul O'Brien, who sends his apologies for not being here tonight, asks, can you give us an update on the Barrett collection?
Yeah, okay, great. So the Barrett collection, we are now at the stage where we have box listed everything. When I say box listed, it means that when you get a collection, you start off and you kind of go, okay, how much have we got? What kind of condition it is in? what we need to do with it to conserve it and to preserve it, and then we need to get what we'd say would be control over it. So we're trying to list it in a very general way, in the most kind of quick and efficacious way we can. And that's what we do. And that's the first level of listing. And that would be kind of collection list. And then you have a box list. And that's to kind of list what's in each kind of box, and then to try and kind of understand where we're going to kind of put things in the collection when we eventually kind of store it and make it available for research. And then after that, you get to what's called item listing. And at that point, you should have all your preservation and conservation done, and you should be able to list pretty much most of what is in the collection down to a, let's say, a letter by letter basis rather than a page by page basis. We haven't kind of gone to that kind of level where we've kind of analysed it, but it's a very good level of description is now upon the collection, and there's a very good level of control. It's complete for preservation and conservation, and we have arrived at a point where we're ready to start digitization, both of the content of the collection, that is to say the written materials, and also the fantastic photographic collection that came with it. Another thing we've done as well is we've worked with the museum on listing and working with the ephemera that came with the collection. Because what you get with a great collection like the Barrett collection is that some of the Barretts are huge aficionados of shotguns. So you've got all this information and material relating to shotguns and little cartridge boxes and kind of holsters and hats and all this stuff, and it's all absolutely fantastic and very, very individual, and it's been pretty kind of well preserved and kind of retained for the museum.
One more question from Michael O'Connell from the floor here.
Just a comment. We talk about where stuff is stored. I think if you're ever in a house and you're looking at somebody's left house and you know there's valuable stuff, I would always recommend that you start at the top and go right into the attic, because that Barrett collection was found at the end of a long day. We were all very tired, and just by pure luck. And what caught my eye in the box that it was in was a little book that was shown how to operate an IRA unit and make bombs and so on. So I said, geez, this is great stuff. But it can so slip by, It was the last thing we did when we were going through the stuff in Barrett's premises, was go up to the attic. Go up to the attic. When did you get in the house, go straight to the attic, because that's where the business stuff is.
That was it. That was the day, Michael. We went in and went up to the attic, and it was pitch dark, and we went up this maid stairs. Yeah, 6 or 7. 6.
We didn't have any helmets on us that day.
6 or 7 suitcases, and I think the excitement in the air when they all came down to the sitting room. And then the broken china that was in the attic, and the religious pictures and other things that were sitting in the middle of it, and then these, I think it was 6 suitcases that had all the documents in it. Yeah. Attic. I always said that attic.
Yeah, true.
And actually, this is a curious aside to the whole thing. I always say to people, it's kind of going slightly off piece. When you're buying an old house, and the auctioneer is saying, "Oh, we're going to clear the house," or the solicitor saying, "Clear the house." I'm always of the opinion that no, leave everything there. At least you know what I mean. At least you can clear it yourself. Yeah, because when people go in to clear a house with a mission, they just dump everything. They dump everything. Okay, Michael, that's for another day.
Okay.
I think Paul was so excited remembering that day as we cleared Barrett's house, he forgot to hand the microphone back to Michael. The two of them went up this rickety stairs into the attic, and the rest of us, I think, were afraid to even risk our lives on the stairs of the ladder or whatever it was. Paul says that's wonderful news about the Barrett collection. He'll be sending his students to Ennis once it's available.
Absolutely, yep.
Paul is going to send his students from Mary Immaculate College to Ennis to study the Barrett archive once it's available. I think that's the last of the questions online and offline. So thank you all very much for coming. Thanks to Vincent for organizing the sound for those here in the room. Apologies to those watching on YouTube for our little breakdown at the start. I'm not sure what happened. Maybe I should have used Chrome rather than Firefox or something, but we'll sort it out. We're back here on the 29th of April, 5 weeks from today, last Tuesday of April as usual, and we have Michael Grimes giving a talk on the last of the Shannon reed cutters. So that's our next lecture. So can we give Michael a big hand and thank him again for coming and enlightening us tonight.
Thank you.